Hey y'all.
Here.
Hello. We're getting some of the audio visual stuff. Oh, that's so cool to hear the echoes part. We're getting the audio visual stuff sorted out, but thank y'all for making it out today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides so we get the PowerPoint up, and then we just assume people will like trickle in as we go along.
Gotcha.
Make sure I do this part right. Okay, cool. Nice. And y'all can see that okay, the Utopic Imagining a Neurocinematic lens?
Mm.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming today on this Saturday afternoon. This is the kickoff of the Futures That's Through Residency's programming for the spring. I guess you can call it semester, but yeah, for lack of better words, the spring semester. If you are familiar with the, oh, sorry, we gotta. Hey. Good, thank you for coming. Oh, yeah. Hey, yo, sorry, we got some loose. This is low-key a rare occurrence because usually it's not cold in here, which is really frustrating. But I'm glad it's warm. It's the But yeah, if you are familiar with the Futures That's Through Residency, it's a project where we have a series of programming and events, specifically also like for our cohort, but also for the public, and this is a part of the public programming. And yeah, I'm super excited to have Sade here to do this amazing presentation and co-host or co-lead this workshop together so we can jump into some announcements before getting into like the meat of the presentation. First, I wanted to shout out that in addition to this event, we have a couple of other events happening and popping off. Okay, cool. We got another cool events popping off for the Futures That's Through Residency. It's going to be a continuation on sessions on Utopic Imagining, which I'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. We got a really dope workshop with artist in residence Doriana Diaz, who will be assisting us in this workshop where we're collaging our utopias. And then I'll be leading us in this workshop where we will be developing inventions and designing technologies that will support our envisioned utopias. So in general, this is like a workshop series where I think through all 3 events that you may attend, like you'll be able to really get the full scope of the utopic imagining process. But if you want to chill and just join this one, that's cool too. But feel free to check out the Futures That's Collective on Instagram for more updates regarding these events. And then also wanted to plug, we also have some other events popping off outside of the residency with the Futures That's Collective. Specifically, or the thing that's coming up right now or very soon, I think this Friday coming up on the 10th, is a listening party for Laila's new album. And it's gonna be in our studio where we are right now. So yeah, come through. I think it's like a $5 to $10 sliding donation scale, but it's really like optional and not mandatory. But it would definitely help support our collective and just sustain our organization. So yeah. And then lastly, we have art making sessions. These events are definitely, I think, more geared toward like our high school population or our audience. But if you know someone or you are a high school artist and you want to make art with your friends or with potential new friends, come through to our art making sessions that we have in the studio. We're going to be having them monthly, and then in the summer have them bi-weekly. So okay, so to start, I wanted to share a little bit about Utopic Imagining as an introduction, but I wanted to also be this thing where we're kind of building a relationship with the pedagogy and praxis as we go through these workshop, this workshop experience, really these series of workshops. But in general, Utopic Imagining was a pedagogy that I co-developed with my good friend, Rita Rutherford. And what we were really interested in is this developing like this process where folks could like basically critically imagine what they want their life to be and create inventions that could really like will that imagination into fruition. We on definition, define it as like an Afrofuturist method of speculating the past, present, and future, and then imagining a utopia, and to then design technologies that support one's envisioned utopia. And on the Afrofuturist level, we were really specifically inspired by Sun Ra and the Sun Ra Orchestra. A lot of his philosophy was this idea of creating alter realities. And what we are interested in is creating alternative futures, where he was like, we could even create alternative realities. He believed and would promote a lot and say a lot in his writing and in his writings and also in his songs that like we have the power like mentally to create the world around us. It's really like what you convince yourself of, and that effect that conviction has is what really like creates the reality around you. And so I kind of wanted to start with this quote from this song from the Sun Ra Orchestra. It's called Somebody Else's World. But I think also linguistically too, when we're thinking about freestyling and free writing, I just thought that it made so much sense for what we're doing today. So I'll just read it for all of us. And you could also, I think it's also really powerful to hear this song too. So if y'all ever want to check it out, it's Somebody Else's World by the Sun Ra Orchestra. It's available on Spotify. That's where I stream my shit. But yeah, it's somebody else's idea of somebody else's world is not my idea of things as they are. Somebody else's idea of things to come need not be the only way to vision the future. What seems to be need not be what need had to be, for what was is only because of an adopted source of things. Some chosen sources was need not be the only pattern to build the world on. And I think also on a personal level, I'm always, I think as a creative and as a creative interested in how I think capitalism and oppressive structures not only influence like our means of like, you know, existing or surviving, but also like our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with the environment. And I think this is a primary example of that, where these structures and these paradigms that we exist under often dictate our future and often dictate the reality that we have around us. But I think when we take on that same position as the people that create the paradigms and the people that create the realities and the futures, that's when we'll see the utopia that we want to see in the real world. And so that's essentially the praxis of utopic imagining. It's taking on that role of the chosen sources was making your own sources to create your own patterns and building your own worlds. So that's what we're going to get into today, and what we will get into in these next few sessions. I'm going to leave it off to Sade for the rest of for her lovely presentation. And yeah, thanks y'all.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. That was like the perfect introduction in so many ways. Thank you so much, Laila.
Yeah.
Thank you for everyone who's joining today. I want to like position myself a little bit so that I can be present not only for virtual attendees, but then also for those who are in the room with us today. Can everyone still hear me and see me all right on the Zoom, hopefully? Yeah, I can't actually like see as you're like existing here, but hopefully everything's okay. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, so hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this earth. My name is Sade Abiodun, and today I'm going to be talking about utopic imagining specifically through the lens of neurocinematic, so a neurocinematic lens. I'm really grateful to be able to be sharing with this particular group. Like, this is a really important space to me for so many different reasons, which I'll get into as we go on in our conversation. So I'm really just a lot of gratitude in being able to share with y'all. So first and foremost, something that I like to do to sort of set the tone anytime I give one of these types of talks and presentations is to start off with breathing. And we're going to be doing a lot of breathing in different capacities today, but I just wanted to start us off here. So just for 60 seconds, we'll just find a way or find different avenues that we can ground ourselves. One way I like to do it is really making sure my feet are planted on the floor. I'm kind of in like a comfortable and relaxed position. And we'll just be doing this for 60 seconds before I then get into the meat of the presentation, if you indulge me. So in whatever way you want to ground, feel free to do that. I'll say maybe for those of you on Zoom, maybe mute yourself just so there isn't too much feedback for those who are also trying to participate. But and then we'll go from there. All right, so 60 seconds. Right. Thank y'all for partaking in that. I do it for myself more than anyone else, I'm not gonna lie, but it's still my favorite part of like any presentation. So one thing that I wanted to kick off by doing, and this actually works really well, we have a little bit more of an intimate group with us today, and I love knowing who I'm talking to, kind of like who I'm in the room with. So for those who are comfortable with sharing, and I think we can start with those on the Zoom, and then we can also transition to those who are in the room with us. If you just start off by saying what your name is, what you go by, what your pronouns are, what your current location is, and your vocation, whether that's what you're doing professionally or what you're doing creatively, and also your mediums of choice if you identify as an artist. And I can't see those on Zoom. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to pull up that tab, but we can just go around and everyone can share.
I'm also super natural.
Yes, that would be great, yeah.
I guess I can go first. My name is Samaj. Pronouns are he, him. Current location / vocation. I live in Southwest. I really wish I was able to be down there with y'all, but
It's
going
cool.
up to North Philly it will be a nightmare to take the trolley. So, but I'm currently working as a teaching assistant. I work with middle school kids. I've done it for like almost 6 months. So yeah, I've been doing that. And medium of choice, recently I've been doing collaging. I've been doing that a lot. And I'm also taking a class that collage and mixed media. So that's been my thing recently.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Y'all hear this from like that?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah. I guess yeah, but Jax, would you be willing to share?
Okay.
Yeah. Wait, can you hear me? Because my headphones are jacked. Oh, you can? Great. I'm Jax. I use they, them pronouns. I'm actually in North, but it's brick, so I didn't want to go outside. I currently make dough at this like gas pizza restaurant in Center. But I like paint and sculpt and collage as an artist. I like to do whatever my heart like says that day. Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. All right, and the lovely ones on the couch over here.
Y'all can hear okay?
Yeah. Volume thing.
We here.
Okay. Oh, hey y'all. No, it's good.
It got so complicated for a second. Okay, we're just doing it from here.
Okay, yeah, okay. Hey y'all, my name is Laila. Location, I am from North Philly. I live in West right now. But we here and I guess they call it Fishtown. I don't know. I guess it's really like that's such a gentrification term though. And I am the, I'm acting like I'm not right now, but I am the founder and director of the Futures Us Collective and the project leader of the Futures Us Residency. I feel very like blessed and honored to like even have this position and like continue this like project. It fuels me really. So I don't know, I'm hyped. I'm even hyped for this session today, especially. And mediums of choice, I would say honestly, like fully curation is like, and I think also one of the things I really love is curating as like a method of cultivating spaces. And so that's, I think, in general, my jam, really. So, yeah. Oh, pronouns, they, them.
So I feel like I'm hosting like a talk show and like each guest is like coming through.
Okay, hi, I'm Omi, pronouns she, her, currently residing in North Philly, actually right here, right now, the studio. Medium of choice. Right now, I've been really into crocheting. That's what I'm actually doing actively while sitting over there. I'm also very much like lean towards writing and poetry with that. And have also been doing collaging and taking a class as well. So that's something for my kind of exploring.
And our last very eligible guest, I'm not Cody.
Hi everyone, my name is Rizan and my pronouns are she, her, and I live in West Philly and I am a PhD student in history. And medium of choice is, writing has been the medium of choice for a long time. Sometimes sketching and drawing makes its way in there, but usually writing is what I've worked with for years. So nice to see y'all.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Thank everyone for sharing. That's really awesome. Like, because again, with a presentation like this, I'm really glad and grateful to be sharing and sort of focus on my work and what I do, but it's also about who we're in community with, right? And like who we're able to engage in a conversation with. So I always love starting there. So to go back to the meat of what I want to move through today, I'll do a little introduction of myself and who I am. So as I said before, my name is Sade. I fall into a lot of categories, but in terms of what my leading or kind of the identities I'm leading with today, I identify as a filmmaker and more specifically an experimental filmmaker, a visual storyteller, really. I think that's where I fall into most comfortably. And as of late, I've really been resonating with this notion of being an interdisciplinarian. So existing not only between sort of mediums and modalities, so bringing in a lot of sonic elements, a lot of movement and performance elements into my artistic practice, but then also moving between disciplines. And as I'll get into in a second, that being both scholarly and also artistic disciplines. I've had work in terms of the sort of my film craft and working as a director and editor that's been shown at a number of different festivals, curated into different programs and galleries. And it's just been really cool overall to get to explore what media making as a filmmaker, sort of, you know, the Western film industry operates in a very specific way, but also as an artist at large, getting to engage with a lot of different spaces. And in my capacity right here or here today, I am in the current cohort of the Futures Us residency program for this year, and I'm very honored to be here. In terms of broader interests, I do a lot of work, and this includes consulting and sort of facilitating around media psychology, around things related to meta science, so sort of looking at science as a discipline and as a field, and really interrogating what we do within those spaces, lots of philosophical things there. And neuroethics. I'm really interested in this question of not only what we're investigating when we're engaging with the mind and the brain, but why and how are we approaching questions this way? And in terms of like work I've done there, I'm currently kind of doing some consulting work with the Harvard Center for Bioethics. I've done some stuff with HBO and specifically the writer's room for Random Acts of Flyness, which is created by a friend of mine, Terrence Nance, and brilliant minds in that space. I've done some work with Pathos Labs, which is like an interesting space, kind of another organization group that does a lot around media making and storytelling and interfacing between science and the arts. And I also produce or co-produce a podcast called Neurocinema, which is all about the intersection of neuroscience and film, and that's really fun. But in terms of what my actual sort of vocation or current professional capacity is I am fully in grad school, which I forget about a lot. But I yeah, yeah, there's so thoughts and prayers to both of us. I'm currently in the third year of my PhD at Princeton University, and specifically in the Neuroscience Institute, right? And specifically in the Princeton Neuroscience Institute. And I have the honor and privilege of being supported not only by the Ford Predoctoral Program, so I'm a Ford Fellow, but also a Princeton New Media Studios Fellow, and do a lot of sort of work and art making in different Princeton spaces, whether they know it or not.
Damn, you just fucking flexing right now.
Well, my
Shit.
research focus is neurocinematics, and that's really, again, what the heart of what I want to talk about today is, which it really does exist, I promise you. I'm like trying to both make it a popular term, but it is real, which it's the neuroscience of film and visual media. And really, literally on the next slide, I'm going to get into this, but asking questions about what media does to the mind and also what our minds do when we're engaging with media. So here is the big question that I've actually spent not only the last 3 years trying to answer, but probably will spend the rest of my life trying to answer. What on earth is neurocinematics? So of course, when you like shove neuro in front of any term, it sounds very fancy and fun. But in terms of what it actually means, when we're looking at cinema and media in the realm of neuroscience and specifically cognitive neuroscience, neurocinematics is this cutting edge field that's very new, it's very young in a lot of ways in comparison to other subdisciplines, where our whole entire focus is investigating how narrative media, which within the field we often refer to as naturalistic stimuli, and this can include anything from movies, so a lot of visual media, which is what I focus on, to music and sonic storytelling, and also spoken narrative, so exchanges and conversation, or written narrative, so on and so forth. And we really, within this field, whether you're looking at neurocinematics specifically, neuroaesthetic or neuroaesthetics at large, or sort of related disciplines, trying to ask how we can use media to understand how the brain, so sort of our internal landscape, interacts with the external world. And I'll get a lot into, or keep coming back to this point of the internal versus the external, so you will get tired of me saying it, but it was really fun. And in terms of sort of the subcategorizations in different ways that neuroscientists not only engage with, I guess, neurocinematics as a field, but also just do a lot of work with naturalistic stimuli to understand more about what the brain is doing. There's work related to memory, so studying how exactly our memory formation processes happen, but then also how we sort of build narratives to help us remember, kind of shape different stories or memory traces that we have. A lot of work is also, or goes into studying social cognition, so how we use narratives to sort of shape how we engage with the world around us, how we engage with people around us. A lot of work on linguistic comprehension, so like language in relation to narratives and how language forms and changes as we're building narratives. And then my personal two favorites, subjective experience and emotion. So there is a little bit less work in terms of individual differences in emotional experiences. That's actually the entirety of what my research focus is. And I'll get into that on the next slide too. But there's a lot that can be done in terms of using media and sort of information on how we engage with media to understand more about how we shape our subjective perspective or experience of reality. And so many different brilliant researchers at different universities and institutions, not only at my home university of Princeton, but also all around the US and all around the world, are doing work really trying to answer these questions. And if you're curious at all just to hear more and learn more about neurocinematics, but also just the broader sort of ways that researchers are using media in their research or in their studies, I dropped a bunch of different examples of that. One of the most popular being my advisor, Ari Hassan, who kind of like invented the field of neurocinematics in some way, or in some ways. He had a wonderful TED talk that he did about it. My other advisor, Ken Norman, had a wonderful New Yorker article come out where he really talked about the practice of thought decoding. So when we talk about what it means to like read minds, if we're actually able to do that, he talked a little bit about that. I recently was featured in this really cool profile by the Society for Neuroscience and talked a little bit about my work there, and specifically how I sort of interface between media making, so as a filmmaker, as an artist, and then also studying media, and then all sorts of different sources. Like it's something I love to talk about. It's my bread and butter in a lot of ways, and so I'm always down to share that. And in terms of the pictures that we have on the slide, I realized I was going to skip over that. Some of the examples that have been used are sort of the classic stimuli that many researchers have used in the studies have been examples from popular media. So Sherlock is really popular amongst neuroscientists. A lot of the foundational studies and research projects within my field have used episodes of Sherlock to sort of study how events and memories are formed and how sort of represent events from the moment that we see them or experience them, and then we're trying to piece them back together, and actually what happens in the brain when those particular sort of event activation patterns are reactivated. Forrest Gump is also really popular, especially with people trying to study emotion, and been used in a lot of different studies. And there's another graduate student, a good friend of mine named Jamal in my lab, who, if, you know, in the same way that I do neuroscience of film, he does a lot on neuroscience of music and specifically music cognition. And he's currently been studying or using Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind to study how the score of a film, so the actual like sort of musical score, affects people's different experience when they're watching things. So really a lot of really cool work going on in that space.
Oh wait, I have a question. I was kind of wondering, like, because you were mentioning how, because first I want to say like Neurocinematic, I haven't ever heard of it, like ever, until now. And I don't know, to me when I hear about it, it sounds like like a philosophy that can like mingle in a lot of different places. Like when you were mentioning like how it interacts with like movies and shows, like the examples you showed, the first thing I thought of was like Mindhunter. That's like like that show about serial killers and stuff like that. Like I imagine, like, I know the study of serial killers and stuff is a different thing, but I imagine the cinema of the show Mindhunters. I imagine that would connect as well with Neurocinematics.
I think there's a lot there, honestly. Well, one, Mindhunter is one of my favorites. I love really like cognitive, like shows with like all those different layers and levels. And I think there is a lot to be said about how the process of making, like when different filmmakers, different artists go into the process of building these worlds, these narratives, how much they bring into that process of like really thinking about the cognitive aspects. And I talk about that, or I will talk about that a little bit, even when I get into some of the artistic works that I've done. But it is interesting. And I think that's one of the things that I want to bridge the gap between in a lot of what I'm doing, to say it's not only that we're studying the narratives themselves and like sort of unpacking all of these different cognitive elements, but there's a lot that artists and creators take in terms of their own understanding of what's going on in the mind and who we are as just very cerebral creatures, and put that into their creative and artistic forms. And so I think it's sort of like two streams that go in like a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and also how the audience takes it and what they use with that.
Exactly. I think actually, so that's a perfect segue in a lot of ways to what my current research project is, which I've sort of very like I've termed it conveniently to be emo narratives. That's sort of the nickname of the research study, but it really is getting into that very idea, that very question. And I'm really interested in answering this question of whether or not we can map subjective emotional experience in the brain, like what's going on when we're engaging with narratives, especially emotional narratives, and understand how those different processes of subjectivity and subjective perception are playing out by showing different individuals very emotionally complex short films. It's not actually just short films. I'm using both short film and then also episodic TV, and not landscapers, unfortunately, but that's another example of a show that I think is very cerebral in a lot of ways. But what I'm interested in is sort of this idea that short form media can create worlds that are not only very emotionally complex, so they have lots of layers and different elements to them, but they're narratively ambiguous. So it's not as though in watching, you know, a particular show, you're guided, you know exactly where you're going to go from point A to point B, right? Like you're sort of presented with a landscape that you as a viewer, you as an audience member, are given the freedom and power to navigate and come to your own conclusions about characters, come to sort of different points in the narrative arc and figure out what you're experiencing there. And I think there's a lot of power, and not only just power, but a lot of intrigue in that process of understanding why different people come to different conclusions or have different experiences with the same types of media. And thinking about even more so if the creators and the sort of the makers of that media were as sort of intentional in the creation of those worlds and knew exactly where their different audience members were going to be guided to. So one of the ways that I'm investigating this in my current study, which is like my bread and butter, it's wholeheartedly what my dissertation topic is collecting neuroimaging data, and specifically fMRI data. So sticking a lot of people into really large scanner and scanning their brains while they're watching these different forms of media, while they're watching short films, while they're watching episodes of TV, and then just allowing them to reflect on their experience of it. So a lot of sort of classical studies within neuroscience, especially, or within psychology as well, kind of our neighboring field, rely on really specific behavioral metrics where you're like rating things on a very like quantifiable scale. But again, that's not how we actually experience reality. That's not how we experience emotion in every day. So the question, or this idea that I'm trying to get at and highlight, is what can you figure out, or what can you find out when you don't ask people what they're feeling, which is actually a lot harder a question to answer, but you're asking why they're feeling or how they're feeling that thing. And then really just allowing all sorts of different computational tools and sort of advanced research methods that we have to take that data and then analyze from there on a neural and behavioral level what's going on and how they form those specific worlds they build, or how they interact with the worlds that they're within.
Okay, I have another question.
Yes. Sorry, there's someone coming in. Okay, cool. Just submitted them. Yep.
I kind of wonder, like, it's kind of a pretty broad like question, a pretty like deep, like kind of a hard question to answer. But I guess what's kind of like, if you were able to get your answer to your question, how would you be able to apply that to like something? I'm curious.
That's a good ass question. That's a good question. So I don't necessarily know, or it's not, I don't know. I think there's not one straightforward answer, right? Because again, the question that you're asking in a lot of ways gets into this question of like, what is the point of science? What's the point of scientific inquiry? When we're asking questions about memory, when we're asking questions about like different cognitive process that we as humans are going through, is the goal to optimize that process? Like, are we trying to make it better? Is the goal to take that process and like apply it to some machine learning algorithm and then get AI agents or like artificial intelligence to do it better than we can? I will say that very much motivated in a lot of ways by just who I am as an artist and who I am as a person, I am simply curious. I'm curious to see if a lot of the experiences that I've not only had, but also tried to capture as an artist and as sort of a very emotionally guided individual and expressively guided individual, and which those I consider to be very qualitative experiences. If there's a way to merge the quantitative frameworks that we have, that a lot of neuroscientists and sort of scientists in general really adhere to, of saying like we can have metrics and things of these things, and then also see how much of the quantitative can map onto the qualitative. The secret with that, though, is that I actually don't believe at my heart of hearts that they are meant to be this one-to-one ratio, and that everything that we can represent with neuroscience is actually going to be sort of accurate or representative to our experiences of just like expressive living and existence. But I love the idea of getting to try, and even more so than that, I love the idea of getting to use the tools that are there to build out a more dynamic and multidimensional framework for what's actually going on in our brains and our minds as we're doing these things. So we'll see what happens.
Because I mean, because even if you like, if you ask a question and you get the answer to it, you might not be able to use it, but just having, us as people, we like to understand everything what's going on. So just having the understanding is usually good enough for us.
Exactly. And I think one thing that is really interesting with that mindset as well, hold on, let me try to click on my slides, there we go, is that also is a perfect segue into this question of like, where does neuroscience actually meet with or merge with this notion of utopia, and specifically utopic imagining, right? Because again, I think one thing that's been really interesting, and I get into this in a few slides later as well, is I'm very aware of like my position within the field that I'm in, right? Like within this academic discipline, as one that has historically been very sort of overly concrete, overly sort of objective, and almost in a lot of ways objectifying of the human experience. And it's one that I think about engaging with sort of my intellectual inquiry and my expressive, creative, curious inquiry in that interfacing in very interesting ways. But one thing that I really love about what neuroscience and sort of a cognitive framework has helped me understand is the beauty and the power of narratives. So narratives, meanings. And a narrative takes on so many different meanings, you know, depending on what the context is, who you're talking to about it. In this context, I mean just like world building or storytelling, right? And I think one thing that's interesting that I've come to a conclusion about, or kind of explored in a lot of my research and a lot of my practice, is that narrative making and narrative sharing is a very powerful way to synchronize our experiences. It's a really powerful way to broaden our community and also to change and shape our context. So we understand that when we think about narratives, and again, this means the visual narratives, visual stories that we engage with, the sonic narratives, sort of like the multimodal environments that we're around. I'll also get into this a little bit later. There are a lot of those narratives that are internal, where we kind of have to dive within ourselves and understand very fundamental things that require internal inquiry to then make sense of the world around us. But then there are some that are external, and they require that sort of interaction and external engagement and experience to make more sense of. And I really love that within the field of neuroscience and within the subdisciplines and spaces that I'm in, there's been so many different sort of morsels and elements of touching on this and scratching at that question of like, what does it mean? What does a narrative do, in terms of understanding brain to brain synchrony, in terms of understanding what different areas of our brain are engaged when we're remembering things, when we're perceiving things, in terms of understanding how we form sort of like different schemas of the world around us and say, oh, when I'm in this environment, I become this person or I act in this way. There's a lot of ways that conversation is one that's been really built out and really explored within scientific space that then helps me appreciate so much more this notion of utopic imagining and this notion of being able to actually shape, build, and change the worlds that I decide to exist within.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And one of the papers, or kind of one of the first ways that I decided to explore this, and one thing that I really find cool, or like that I try to play around with in this slide or in these following slides, is the fact that with who I am as a person and sort of like this interdisciplinarian, there are ways that I've engaged with things in my intellectual spaces, and there's also ways that I've engaged with things in my creative spaces. So the following few slides, you see examples of both of those, like how I've explored them in two ways. So continuing on that point of utopic imagining, and sort of how we understand and how we experience it as people within this world, as Black folk, as queer folk, we understand that in the context, the world that we exist in currently, Blackness is often mediated or sort of looked at and viewed, perceived through a lens of voyeurism, through a lens of observation, through a lens of invasive consumption, right? So there's always things that the world around us are trying to take from us in terms of who we are, in terms of how we experience the world, in terms of what we are able to give to the world. And that consumption can be cultural, that consumption can be intellectual, that consumption can also be creative, where like ideas and sort of expression is stolen in a lot of ways. This is something that, because of the reality of my experiential sort of experiencing, LOL, but my experience with this, especially within academic spaces, it drove me by the end of my undergraduate career and my time of studying neuroscience at my undergraduate institution to write this paper entitled Seeing Color, a discussion of the implications and applications of race in the field of neuroscience. And I won't really get into sort of the entire like plethora of all the things that this paper covers and is about, because it really started out as a manifesto in a lot of ways. Like I was just pissed. I was really this was I started writing it my senior year. Yeah, at Duke. I was at Duke University. We both went to Duke. It's a really specific experience of a place, and especially within the research and like sort of scientific communities that I was in, that I realized that there was a very specific lens through which people viewed and understood how Black people move through the world. And I really wanted to speak to the fact that as innovative and as complex as a field that neuroscience is, there are a lot of ways, and not just like a lot of ways that it subtly or sort of covertly does this, but very overtly leans into not only supremacist frameworks, but ones that contribute to the notion of like historic racism or scientific racism, a lot of just like very supremacist ideologies, a lot of very hierarchical ideologies. And that if we were going to like advance or like move forward as a field, we had to not only address this, but really change the way that we were trying to engage with identity and with culture and with Blackness. And
that's pretty interesting. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
yeah.
But like, like I never really thought about it that way because I really love science as well. And
Mm.
I guess when you brought up the fact of like racist notions through science, like I never I just think of science as such like a fact-based kind of sterile thing, and I kind of forget that humans were involved in it. So of course race will play a factor, like with black people having smaller brains and stuff like that. Like I didn't think that I kind of didn't think about the fact that that needs to be pushed out as well, and maybe still here. So,
Right. And the fact that even though like the language or sort of ways that we talk about it might have changed a little bit, a lot of that assumption of like objectivity is still there. And you think about it, you realize that a lot of what comes down to this notion of fact, or comes down to this notion of truth, depends on who has the power to declare those things to be factual, has that power to declare those things to be objective truth. And those lenses are always very subjective and always very contextual. Yes, please.
This is like when I'm talking about when I was saying in the intro about like narratives that determining reality, like that's exactly an example of that. Like what is said and what is written, and also what is prioritized as fact, is what we navigate the world through as reality. So when we allow ourselves to switch that and make our own facts, our own narratives, that's when the reality switches.
Exactly. Period. Truly. And one of the interesting things sort of about the point at which this particular paper came out and sort of was shared with the world was it was during 2020, which everyone remembers what it was like to exist during 2020 for so many different reasons. And it was interesting how like the paper and this question, this idea that I talked about in it was so revolutionary in a lot of ways. Like it was very popular among scientists, like got read like thousands upon thousands of times. But I was like, I'm not actually saying anything all that new. It's just that the scientific community is not all that ready to, in a given moment in time, unless really call to it, question and interrogate how we approach our own field, how we approach our own processes.
Okay.
Please. Yeah, this is like the talking chair for
Exactly. This is where the guest podcast comes up. But also I think, Sade, that's why like seeing you speak in an interdisciplinary fashion is so useful, because I feel like also like, basically neuroscientists are not willing to hear it unless you put it in my double columned academic paper format. They're like, fascinating. When people have been talking about like, wow, science is so racist in like so many other fields and ways for so long, especially like I've had a lot of feelings, as someone who's also in academia, about like how academic spaces often will not accept personal experience as truth and expect you to like distance yourself from it and put it into a paper format before they'll believe it. And I'm like,
that's not how we experience it.
No, and let's give your work some more context. Duke was racist. We had so many racist incidents, right and left. And so the fact that you wrote this makes sense.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for I really love this in so many ways. And to actually like fully and wholeheartedly piggyback off that point, like there was something really important to me, and that just has become really important to me in the shaping of my identity in the different spaces, to not only be able to say this sort of in the dialect, in the language that the academics, the intellectuals will respect and appreciate, but then also express it outside of that and say like, but also as an artist, as a creative individual, this is also going to be what's informed, or what is informing my creative practice. And the video, like sort of the short film that I was playing in the background on this slide as well, was an example of that. Like this is also something that came out in 2020 that I worked on, called Bodies, which was really an exercise for me, not only in sort of my practice as an editor, especially in taking different sort of examples and compiling them into a new story, a new narrative, but really to say, we hear this term Black bodies coming up again and again and again, this like really specific notion of Blackness being a corporeal experience, and then being something that manifests in like the suffering of Black bodies, the exploitation of Black bodies, so on and so forth. But I wanted to take that notion and that word bodies and say, what if I focused on it in terms of an aesthetic appreciation of the beauty of the different dimensions of exploration of femininity, masculinity, the expressions of intimacy, and see how those sort of Black bodies are intertwining or sort of engaging with one another. And what came out of it was this short film, which again, because it was more of an exercise of taking sort of cinematic examples of Black bodies and mashing them together. It's not one that I've shared on many like different festival circuits, but it was an exercise in me saying, we are more than this voyeuristic lens through which you're seeing us. We are more than just the suffering of our bodies, the pain of our bodies. We are beautiful and we are expressive and we are very intimate. And these were two pieces that were created and kind of shared within that same capsule of time, but were very different modalities of me expressing or communicating what that experience was. And that was a really cool thing to be able to do. Yeah, so, and if you ever want to watch it, like all of these shorts are, most of them actually are on my website or different places. Another thing that was really interesting to me. Yeah.
Okay, this can be yelled out. If you haven't seen Sade's website, you gotta, it's really. That's fine.
So another sort of, and actually, honestly, first of all, thank you for that compliment. I'm like, now I'm like blushing, but like, I think of a lot of expression. I think a lot of like how I've decided to share my work, how I've decided to share my experience as an act of cinema. So again, cinema is not just about the visual storytelling or about the elements that come through when you're watching a film, right? But it's very multimodal. There's visual activity, and this is like where my neuroscience brain kind of pops into things again. And it comes from a lot of my focus or interest in neurocinematics, but there's visual activation. So we are sort of being engaged with what we are seeing around us, what like visual cues we have in our environment. There's also oftentimes sonic immersion, right? So we're guided by not only a cinematic score, but also just the sounds in our environment around us. Like in each day that we exist is oftentimes like a cinematic experience, just because we're piecing together all these different elements of sensory stimulation in order to form that story. My favorite, and one that's often underappreciated, is this notion of somatic resonance as well. So we are feeling beings. We are not only feeling our own selves within our bodies, we are feeling ourselves touching the earth around us. We feel the touch of those that were in our environment, who we are coming into contact with. Touch can be very grounding in so many different ways. It can be very intimate. And there are these modalities, I think, of going back to sort of these different disciplines or explorations of it within the dimensions or spaces of neuroscience, where we're looking at memory, perception, emotion, and social cognition that also come down or come and translate into these dimensions of like our sensory and sort of more than sensory experience, right? Where we're exploring and navigating through space. We are traversing time. We're both in the present, but then also imagining futures and also sort of reconciling with pasts. We're experiencing it along the dimension of cinema, which is like oftentimes crunching these things together and forming these stories and these narratives. And then also we're experiencing it through community. So we are not only, we are not individual isolated human beings that are kind of carrying our stories and do that completely alone or not affected by the narratives of others, but we are bringing these stories and these mosaics of our experiences together and reconciling them to make more sense of the world around us. And one way, even before really diving into this, either in my research practice or in my practice as sort of a full-time, or not full-time, but professional filmmaker, that I would explore this was through my first short film entitled Godspeed, where I really wanted to sort of engage in what was a cinematic exploration. Oh no, it was, yeah. We wanted to engage in this like cinematic exploration of what it looked like to sort of reconcile with the multiple timelines, the multiple different versions of ourselves in different stages and spaces of time, and say that no matter where we are along our time, along our journey, there's love, there's appreciation, there's a lot of grace there. And one thing that's really interesting for me about Godspeed is this was wholeheartedly a film that came about simply just through the act of engaging in conversational art, where I was listening to Godspeed by Frank Ocean one day and was really just like struck with a very specific visual, a very specific sort of imagining of what it would look like to say, I will always love you, I'm wishing you Godspeed, I'm wishing you glory, but see that through the lens of Black womanhood. And that's where that film came about. And it felt like in a lot of ways my first science or cognitive experiment in ways of trying to translate between what was a very cerebral experience of that to then expressing that through filmmaking. So I really loved getting to traverse all these different dimensions and modalities, and then bring those together in the cinematic expression.
Oh wait, can I jump in really quick?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't be one to interrupt when you're talking, so I just kind of wait. But when as you were talking, two things kind of came to my mind. One thought is it's kind of interesting that neurocinematics is something we all kind of, I guess, experience. As humans, we kind of naturally understand, but we just don't really think about it that deeply. I think it's kind of cool that we kind of just like subconsciously just kind of just go through those motions. But when you try to break it down piece by piece, you're like, holy shit, this is a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. And another thought is like your previous short film plus with 2020 plus Utopia idea, I think it all matches pretty well. And like it helps me kind of understand that Utopia idea a bit more. And especially because even if you don't think about it in a neuro cinematic way, like the concept of the movie of, showing different types of, I guess Black love, like intimacy, stuff like that. You don't even have to think about it in a neuroscience way, but that's a utopia for someone because that's what someone will want.
Exactly.
So that's all I gotta say.
No, and it's beautifully said. Beautifully said. You keep on like providing the perfect segues like, into the next thing I'm saying. So I'm like, no, period. Like exactly what you said. I see 300,000%. Like I really do think that I love so many different sort of mediums, right? And I consider myself a very like musically sort of guided individual. I consider myself to love to like move through the world, very performatively guided. But one of the reasons that I feel such a specific love for visual storytelling and for filmmaking is that you really are able to create these capsules and that you get to zoom into someone's perspective, right? And you get to see how, and I'll just read directly from my slide in terms of saying this, how we as individuals and communities relate to and navigate internal and external landscapes. Because again, there's really very few limitations that we actually have to place on what a visual story is. Like there are conventions, of course, in terms of what we think of as good filmmaking and that you might practice, but you can see people genre bending. You can see people bending these lines between what is horror and what is comedy. You can see people bending lines between what is satire and what is serious, just depending on how they approach their type of storytelling. And there are different sort of I can't even really say why exactly I included the lines and the different examples that I did on the slide, but traversing dimensions, that's one phrase or notion that comes up so much when I think of my favorite examples of visual storytelling and sort of the worlds, especially with relation to episodic television and episodic cinema, which I really love for a lot of reasons. Narrative escapism is a beautiful thing too. Again, sort of subversing this notion of what a narrative is. Like, does a narrative have to be linear? Do you have to have a redemption arc for a character? Do you have to follow a specific timeline between different episodes and things? Not necessarily. Like, you really get to create a playground in which each capsule that you're creating could explore completely different ideas that could be linked to one another or could just be entire different universes in and of themselves. And then also, like, kind of going back to the point that I was saying before, this notion of multimodal mediation, that it's not just about what you are seeing, it's also about what you're hearing, what you're feeling, it being a very, like, thinking of like somatic experience, not just as what we are physically or externally touching or sort of sensing, but when you feel moved, right? That's a very real, very informative sensation of like what is being guided, what is being pulled from you when you're in someone else's world. So one, or I guess not even one, but what's been really interesting for me as of late is to see how kind of as time has gone on, as I've developed my research, as I've developed my artistic practice, how my interests have sort of continued to be shaped and taken different forms. And in this slide, and kind of the next few slides, I get into what my latest artistic or creative exploration has been, which is, I will just like, give the warning now, it's so loosey-goosey soupy that it's not going to be like really well, like summarized per se in what I'm saying, but it's been really informative and really interesting to see how it plays out and how I can actually just see again the cognitive side of things and the creative side of things merging. As of late, I've been really interested in these three notions and these 3 points. One is metacognition, which is one of my favorite new buzzwords, which really is just the process of thinking about thinking, but then also meta-creativity, which is creations or creative practices that are centered around creativity. I've also been really interested in perspective, again, with my whole sort of research focus being subjective experience of emotion. It really has had me, or kind of developed into appreciation of how the multiple facets of our realities, our perceived realities, like what we think we experience in the world, really are what then we piece together into the reality that's represented. Again, not even it being a matter of one single objective or universal truth, but one that is shaped by the multiple lenses through which we're gazing. And then also I found myself wholeheartedly obsessed with process, and really thinking about capturing interpersonal creation. So just the process and the act of jamming. This is something that I love jazz for so many different reasons, specifically because play and process come in so heavily when you think about how that sort of improvisation space is formed and created. But then also the exchange of different forms of process and how we change and sort of influence our individual processes while we are existing within the constraints of space and time. So that constraint could be conversation, that constraint could be a particular project or practice, that constraint could be a residency program, right? It could be just some capsule in which you know that you're going to be engaging with certain players, and there's going to be something that you've come in with and something that you leave with that has fundamentally changed how you view and see and engage with the world, but on this level of perspective and also metacognitive processes.
Okay, again, I have another question. I have too many questions.
No such thing.
So of all 3 of these interests, what would you say is the one you probably see the most? I say, just looking at these 3 alone, I would say the process is probably the one I would see the most. I mean, because when I think about, like, you know, the process, like you said, jazz, it's kind of like sometimes it's planned out. There's a lot of art in it not being planned out, is going with the flow. And I feel like you can think about it this way, like just people talking in general, like random person on the street, is just kind of that process, that winging it process. Even though you kind of know what to say, know what to do, you still don't know where it's going to lead. So
it's a good question, honestly. I would want my go-to answer to be process, honestly, but I've had to be very intentional about finding and sort of seeking out the spaces in which I'm able to witness process. Because, like, the thing about process is that dependent on an individual or community's desire for their process to be externalized, it can be very intrusive and very invasive to catch someone in process if they don't actually want that process to be something that's done under observation. And that's where intimacy and sort of this notion of consent is very important, this notion of familiarity and not just gazing in. Like there are a lot of times, like a very like when I disentangle myself from like my academic lens, right? I have to be aware that I can't just assume that I'll be welcomed and step into every space and just get to be a fly on the wall and observe, right? There are a lot of ways that has been a historical form of violence against communities that are trying to protect their process, protect their practice. And I love when I've formed enough a relationship with communities, like even since moving to Philadelphia, one of my favorite things that my sister and I do is almost weekly, we just find different jazz jam sessions. Honestly, shout out to Doriana for 300,000 different reasons, but we'll just show up to Jazz Box and there'll be some jam going on at Jazz Box. We'll show up to Time in Center City and like different people will be playing, like really talented, brilliant individuals and musicians, but you still have to sort of not even earn your place there, right? But make clear that you're coming in with something to bring, with something to offer, not just sort of voyeuristically trying to consume and take it away from that space. Because that's also something that, again, if we look at the history of many musicians, especially Black creators and musicians, many processes have been stolen and sort of appropriated and propagated without there being proper credit, right? That's how rock and roll, like, right. So process is something that it's one of my favorite to sort of observe and witness, but it's actually far easier for me to witness and sort of be privy to metacognition. Like I've kind of made a profession out of thinking about thinking in a lot of ways. And so I exist within a metacognitive space very easily. And actually sometimes as the artistic individual that I also am have to protect parts of my creative self from my cognitive self to make sure that you're not always like perpetually intellectualizing every single thing and question an idea. Like some things do deserve to be felt and some things do deserve to be thought about. And even with, so I'm really not answering your question now, because I was also gonna say, like, I do witness and sort of observe a lot about perspective as well, because again, each of us as individuals carry our own universe. We carry our own sort of like formation of our experiences, our histories. We carry dreams of like what the future can be. We carry differences in our perspective about what our present is, how we feel versus how we think people think we feel, perspective, like perception versus intention, all sorts of different things. And so I think I will see how different perspectives either clash or sort of interact with one another very often, but that is, it's not always engaged with us at this level of like, oh, well, that's just different perspective. Again, that's something that's very contextually dependent. And also we exist where like certain perspectives that people have, like people form political ideologies, people form entire cultures and sort of belief systems based on their perspectives. And they're not always deemed to be subjective. Oftentimes people think that their perspective is very objective. And so it's one of those things, there's always context around how that is engaged with. So that didn't answer the question at all, but all three of them.
No, it actually did, because I guess when I was thinking about these three, I was kind of thinking of it. Well, honestly, just process. I was thinking of it kind of, again, from my personal perspective, to be kind of like a lot easier. But when you add the fact of intimacy and not people not wanting to share their experience, it would be hard.
Yeah.
And with perspective, like you said, like certain things are just people's perspectives or just people's opinions could be very bad to your view, to your perspective. So like you kind of explaining again definitely did help me like understand it more.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting sort of getting to explore all of these things through the lens of this project that I've been working on, entitled Ampersand. And this is one that started during a residency that I took part in last summer, where I was at this interdisciplinary institute in Scotland. It was a wild time. I'll tell stories about that any day. And at that interdisciplinary institute, again, this was bringing together of a lot of different people in intellectual disciplines, so philosophers, anthropologists, people within both scientific fields as well as the humanities, and then also artists. So artists that were interested in a lot of interdisciplinary work, a lot of other multi-hyphenate artists. And the general theme of this institute is one of understanding knowledge, understanding intelligence, understanding how we form meaning in culture, which again, when you engage with those types of questions in intellectual spaces, it can sort of be a toss-up. Like our notion of what intelligence means, right, in terms of what knowledge means, is one that's very contextually specific. But I knew what I wanted to do within that space is sort of, again, take a little bit of a meta view and zoom out to thinking about what these processes, even as we are bringing together all of these different minds and ideas together, looks like, and then understand the sort of interfacing between two different worlds. And so that's one of the reasons that the project is called Ampersand. It's like about the scholar and the artist, the self and the other, so on and so forth. And this has just been an ongoing exploration, a work in progress or in process, in which I've tried to bring together all sorts of different elements of not only my own personal exploration as sort of a very interdisciplinary individual, but existing within these different spaces. And what's really interesting about the main framework that I've like sort of focused on and looked at this project through is that this is one that's actually based in what exists within intellectual practice already. There's a lot of work being done by there's sociologists of science, right? So people who sort of study the sociology of science, who have focused on this in terms of thinking about knowledge sharing, and specifically the question of, and this is like all of these, the philosophy, economics, and sociology are approached through the lens of like sociology of science, but I've just thought about it in terms of the sociology, philosophy, and economics of knowledge sharing and knowledge making. So within the philosophy question, it's like, how is knowledge synthesized and why do we engage with that process? In terms of the economics of it, how does knowledge transaction take place, and what are the rules and parameters of that exchange when we exchange ideas, when we exchange creative work? And then the sociology, what do we observe just in that process of exchange, and what do we experience during those interactions? And those are sort of three frames through which I've really been interested in exploring it, and then adding a frame to that of like the performance of it, right? Because we can look at all of those things in this like very intellectual way, but I'm like, as an artist, as a creative individual, what does it look like to think of this as an art, like the art of knowledge sharing and knowledge making? Thinking more about those sort of subcategories, like 3 different realms I also dove into or have been diving into with that are this notion of the philosophy of knowledge sharing being informed by introspection. So again, we dive in and ask these questions about what are we doing and why are we doing it? Economics being really highlighted by the notion of interaction. So when we're doing those exchanges, and then the sociology really being highlighted by the notion of interview, like when you actually ask and talk about and interrogate, what was this process of exchange like for you? What do you find out? And within the framework of what we're talking about today, again, like the notion of utopic imagining, I also wanted to broaden that out outside of just introspection, interaction, and interview, and bring in this notion of imagination being another really important mode of that, saying that you're taking internal context that comes through in any of these stages and expanding either towards or beyond the notion of external possibility. But also this really important idea of resonance. So this notion of synchrony, or specifically idiosynchrony. So taking our differences and sort of finding synchronization or harmony within that space and using that to expand towards or beyond the notion of communal harmony and the process of creatively synthesizing. And those just being like really interesting ideas of that, the fact that like, again, it's not something that's just happening at an individual level. There are processes of like diving within yourself to understand these things, but it always comes back to this point of engaging and saying, who are you allowing yourself to actually exchange and go through these processes with? What is the community that you're imagining yourself being a part of? What are the realities that you're dreaming with other people when you're thinking about these things? And in general, like the project that I've been working on, it's really informed by specific examples or sort of references or frames that I've been thinking about when doing it. To name a few of them, like sort of the philosophy has been really deeply motivated by Flowers for Algernon, which is a book by Daniel Keyes, which is just, it's really interesting. Actually, I won't even get into it now, but it's a really cool book. It's actually one of my tattoos as well. And also the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, both of which sort of chart this journey of knowledge gathering and what it looks like to go through the journey of increasing, quote unquote, one's knowledge, what that actually means, and whether that's a process of increase or a process of sort of decay, which of those processes are happening. The notion of the interaction really being formed by Art of My Mind by Bell Hooks, which is just really an interesting work to me in terms of how she's not only engaging with the critical works of other artists and other sort of creative individuals, but she's talking about her own personal journey, like leading with that, then how sort of her perspective, her sort of review of those works, and then in that same sphere, in that same exercise, then having conversational exchange with many of the artists and creators that she is kind of critiquing or creating a conversation around to add that element to the work. And it's just always been one of my favorite sort of exercises to revisit or review when I think about what art critique looks like. And then the interview process, or sort of this process of capturing these exchanges, one of the, for sure, just like most fundamental pieces of forming this idea has been Symbiopsychotoxiclasm, Take One specifically, which is a meta documentary by this fantastic documentarian named William Greaves, where he really exhibits or sort of explores, can't find words sometimes, what it looks like for creative process to be captured and how sort of the dynamics of social engagement and so on and so forth will change and sort of cause tension in that process, especially when it's under observation. So it's literally a documentary about a documentary about a documentary, like so many levels of sort of crazy wild experimentation. That's really cool. And again, Flowers for Algernon, even thinking about interview and really asking the question of what does it look like for this process to be chronicled. And the frame of Flowers for Algernon being that it's a scientific experiment, right? Like there's this process of a so-called like intellectual body being engaged in or invested in this increase of his intelligence, and thinking of the ethical implications of what it looks like for us to engage and observe the process that people go through in self-exploration. So I've said so many different things, but really bringing it back home, like bringing it back down, there are different ways that I could summarize this. And two things that stick out to me are this notion that I mentioned before of dimensions of exploration and then also dimensions of expansion. And these are sort of the two questions that I want to leave us with before sort of then moving into the stage where we'll get ready for like the workshop exercise that we're going to do. The first question in the realm of the dimension of exploration being, if you were not restricted by your physical reality, what would you allow yourself to imagine, not only for yourselves, but also for others? And then the question related to the dimensions of expansion is, if you were not restricted to your physical reality, where would you allow yourself to go within yourself or outside of yourself? And thinking about, again, these dimensions that exist when we talk about this in a neuroscientific context of memory, perception, emotion, and social cognition, those are really only frames through which we can think about this exploration and expansion through the different dimensions of space, time, cinema, and community. And that's really the majority of what I wanted to share today. I guess I can share this slide quickly because this does involve some like setup and talking ahead of what the workshop is, but I'll go back here really quickly, both if people are writing down those questions, but also just to pause and say a thank you to everyone again for not only attending, but also engaging really actively and dynamically with this conversation like this. I couldn't imagine this going any better in so many different ways. And that I really appreciate getting to share again across these different modes and mediums, what it looks like to explore these things with utopic imagining as the frame. So yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I would really want to Miss Frizzle myself. I feel like I have to like go inside on this like kind of literal lane, like deepen my understanding of what the fuck is happening in there.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So as a kind of setup, heading into what we're about to do for the sort of workshop exercise of it, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this notion, this concept of ISFC, which specifically stands for Inter-Subject Functional Connectivity. And this is one of the many metrics that we use within my field. It actually was also developed by not only my advisor, but some of the scientists, some of my colleagues at Princeton, where it uses sort of neuroimaging data, right? Like sort of these different spatial activity patterns that we gather from different like layers or levels of network functionality within the brain, and takes two brains, like I'll actually just leave it at a two brain structure, right? And looks at the co-fluctuation of those two brains. So really what is happening within those brains, especially when they're in an environment where they're watching the same stimulus, when they're watching or listening to the same narrative, so on and so forth. And at what points over the course of stimulus presentation do we actually see a synchronization happening in those brains? And this is something that you observe, right? But there will be specific points in time that brains do synchronize. We talk about it a lot in terms of even brain-to-brain communication at these different points in time when they're experiencing the same stimulus. And so, yeah, just to read out the definition, it's a measure of the co-fluctuation of two brains in concert using a correlation between activation in the respective brain regions that is driven by the same narrative stimulus. And one of the things that this is, or one of the reasons that this is so cool to me, is that this is a phenomenon that we specifically observe when people are engaging with narratives, when they are listening to music, when they're watching film, right? So we can see, again, going back to that original point, that narratives can be such a powerful way to actually see how we resonate with one another and how on a deeper level, even beyond what we're able to communicate, we do synchronize. And in that theme, just because I'm not only a nerd, but also a music nerd in so many ways, a few months ago, I started building this playlist called ISFC, which were just examples to me of sonic landscapes and different pieces of music that I felt myself pulled into a very specific resonant space with. And I always have sort of dreamed of the opportunity to be able to go through and sort of listen to, engage with different elements or parts of this playlist with others. And without actually being able to measure it, I wouldn't stick everyone in the room inside a scanner at the same time to see it, but knowing just at my heart of hearts that there's like the synchronization of our brains when we're listening to these musics and when we're in this music, and when we're in these landscapes together. And so now what we're sort of going to transition into as our exercise is a little bit of a taste, a little morsel of this. This is a very experimental space. Like, again, this isn't something that's been like heavily tried and tested. Though I will say there's a lot of really interesting work that's being done by the colleagues that I mentioned in my lab, those who are doing music cognition and so on and so forth, to actually look at what's happening during sort of the mindfulness and meditation practices as they're linked to music, and looking at not only like sort of dopaminergic release and what's going on with different neurotransmitters, but also what different regions of the brain are really brought online when we are meditating and when we're experiencing sonic landscapes. So as a little bit of an homage to that, I wanted to do this exercise today. And I guess I'll sort of like transition to letting Laila lead and step in, because like this is the part that we were like forming as we were kicking it off.
I would also say first though, I kind of wanted to fill the room both virtually and in person to see if like a 3-minute break would make sense for folks, just to get reacclimated and all of that. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's do that and we can transition. So
Perfect.
let's jump off of the camera and audio, and then we'll transition and be in a different part of the studio.
Perfect. All right. See everyone in 3 minutes. All right, so we're still in process of setup and everything, but it's going well. But to sort of preface what we're about to do, it's again, like, it's going to be a little bit of a testing space, and even the instructions that I have on here are to frame it, but it's probably going to end up changing depending on how you want to engage with this, right? But I've titled it a sonic meditation. It really is more generally just like us creating a sonic landscape space, right? Where we're going to move through a few different tracks from this playlist that I have. And if anyone's interested in me, actually might not be able to show on the screen, but if anyone's interested in getting their hands on the playlist too, I'm definitely willing to share it. It's a work in progress in many ways, and like, it's not like tried and tested, but they're just tracks that like resonate with me, and hopefully they resonate with other people for similar reasons. And what we're going to do is do like a first little test with a short track, where we're going to like sort of just listen. We're just going to exist. And it's really important, I think, more so than anything, for you to exist as you want to, right? Comfortably, whether that's laying down, whether that's in the dark or in the light. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, something to write with and on that you'll want to grab, that'll be great for the exercise too. Because what we'll do is just let ourselves immerse in each of these sonic landscapes. And really, when you're doing that, the one, like, I guess, like, invitation or instruction that I provide is for you to latch on to some element of that particular landscape that resonates with you. That could be the rhythm, like if it's something that has a little bit more of like a rhythm and a beat to it. You can synchronize your breathing and kind of synchronize how you're moving in and out of it to that rhythm. If it's a specific melody or harmony and you want to like sort of float on that, it's just about synchronizing some part of yourself, whether that's breath, whether that's sort of like your cognitive rhythms, to what it is that you're experiencing, and really allow yourselves to float into that space. And as I say in the instructions, try to tune into that element with your body rhythm, your breathing, your blinking, whatever flexing or squeezing of muscles that you want to do. And when you're thinking about a prompt, this is actually interesting because this first prompt that I've included on here, and there's like typos on the slide and everything, but whatever. The first prompt that I've included on here is actually the literal question that I ask to my participants in the study that I'm running right now, where I'm doing this with visual narratives, right? So it's in your own words, describe how you felt about the events of course, instead of this episode, it's going to be this particular sonic landscape or this song, as if you were talking to a friend. Describe to the best of your ability any significant events or emotions you experience, and provide as much context as you can as to why you felt this way. Take as much time as you need. If that's one frame that you want to think about when engaging with this, feel free to. But another one that really is just like, it's as free form as you want it to be, that you could think about is, what sounds and imagery came to mind as you were listening? What rhythms and sounds did you latch to as you were moving through it? So whatever grounding practice that you really want to, however you want to approach this, do that. And then after we listen to the first one, we'll give ourselves some free writing time as well. And then we'll do a little group sharing. And then with the others, we'll also move between those two. And then after a certain point, just allow music to play while people engage in free writing and sort of like allow themselves to do whatever rhythm and synchrony that they want. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Laila, did I miss out on anything in explaining that?
No, but I will just add, I think, sorry I said no. But I would also quickly say, I think also one thing I want to offer as like an encouragement is for folks to really also like play with language, I think, in general, while you're describing this. Like, you can invent your own words, you can write backwards if it makes sense to, you can like even not even use words, but also maybe even draw to communicate. I think in general, I think one thing you can allow yourself to is like invite the opportunity to like write and communicate in different ways you haven't before. To like expand that form or method of communication and method of thinking internally.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think also this John can be off of the TV. Yeah, I think we're
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna remove it from the TV. I'm gonna do people want the screen or like the prompts to be up on the screen while they're listening, or do people feel like they have a good idea and they can just like engage with it? Because then I don't have to keep sharing the screen.
I'm personally okay with it not being on the screen.
Okay.
I don't know about anyone else.
Perfect. So what I'll end up doing is I'll stop my video, and I'm gonna try to figure out how to do the sharing of just the sound. We'll see.
Repeat the prompts again.
Yes.
I mean, I think you can just share, like, you know, when you share your screen,
Yeah,
like
and then
when you're
it,
teaching, and you just share it through Zoom.
yeah,
Zoom is the same thing, but just make sure the sound is on for sharing.
that's what
On Spotify, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's,
yeah, I thought there was, oh, this is what I was trying to do. Yeah, like do a little this and then have presenter view, right? And then I'm gonna do a little this, right?
Yes.
And then I do a
Just
little,
make sure
yeah,
it
the,
says sound on or whatever.
yep.
Share sound, yeah, there you go.
And then I do this. And then, did you see like the little British accent that came out too?
Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
then I do this. So now what I'm gonna try and see is if I'm gonna mute myself, but it should still share the sound from the computer. So I'm gonna play a really quick clip and mute myself and let like the fingers up if you can still hear the sound, okay? Okay, cool. Yeah, perfect.
And
Perfect.
also, I just want to kind of jump real quick. Like, I think this is a pretty cool exercise because, like, every single time, like, for me, like, just neuroscience as a whole is very fascinating because for me, when I listen to music, I'm always, it's always a visual component, like, with it as well. Like, it's never like I just listen to it and just like, that's it. It's always a visual component. And I even have a playlist where it's like pretty much similar to yours, where it's just like the songs that just spark like a distinct like image in my mind.
Yeah.
So it's pretty dope that we're doing this because it'll probably give me some experience.
I know, I'm really
writing out my
excited to
thoughts.
share. Yeah.
I think that's also like, I feel like another aspect is like building off of ideas collectively, because I feel like when we bring brains together, we're like generating knowledge that we wouldn't be able to individually. So like, yeah, I'm hyped for the conversation parts too, for sure. All right, so if everyone is situated in my pen, I'm looking for like a functional pen, but hopefully I can see it.
Oh, like another pens. Little ones floating around.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, so we're gonna get started with the first song, and this one's like maybe 2.5 minutes long, and then after that we'll pause, do a little of the sharing, and then continue from there. All right?
Let's go.
All right.
This the song?
That's not the song. Sorry,
Because I fuck with this song. This song hard.
That's so embarrassing.
Nah, that's fire. That's fire.
Oh, I'm well, all right. Now, okay,
That's hard.
it's happening now.
That's hard.
All right, now this is it now. This is it. Sorry, y'all. We just had some new people join, so I'm gonna restart it, but let everyone get situated first. Welcome.
It's good, right?
Yes, it's really good.
Okay, but can we look at the gradient on the windows right now?
Yeah.
Like, look at that ombre.
This has been the most attended event.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And I like the new time.
I'll leave this. I'll leave the camera in here on too, so y'all can see what's going on.
That's, I think I was gonna say that, like, this is so refreshing too, like, being in this context. It is Saturday.
It is.
I think
Yeah, I would be like,
Should we wait for everyone to like get situated and stuff before we start? No?
Yeah, it's please.
Yeah?
I feel like I be trying to make sure folks are in Zoom aren't just.
Exactly, like lingering. I mean, I could keep playing tambourine. No, I'm not.
Yes.
That was hilarious.
I was like, this is not the kind of music I was expecting, but I like it.
But
I
let's
like it.
go.
Oh my god.
Wow, you also did the same?
Yeah.
Kind of didn't leave out mine.
That's really awesome. That's really awesome. Okay. I think we're good now to get everything, or is someone, oh, there's still one more person. Yeah, well, I guess before we like start, are there any questions that people had about like what to do or how to approach? Yeah. Or, yeah, like it's gonna be, it is a really nice purple. There we go.
Okay, I do have a question. So I would say for you, like the prompt that you asked to us, and when you ask it to other people, do you try to just ask anybody, or do you try to ask specific like people, like artists or musicians, and comparing that to like maybe people who are not like artistically inclined, air quotes, to compare the two?
That's a really interesting question. I feel like, so what's interesting about a lot of research studies, especially when they happen at like research universities and institutions, is usually that the subject population that people are pulling from is just the students that are on that campus. Like there's a whole phenomenon called like the weird population, where like there are a lot of scientific research studies that are just run on like white, Western educated, like, what is it? Like I don't know what the I is, like industrialized, like something, like it's just like liberal, like white kids at liberal arts universities type thing. And so you don't actually get all of that, a lot of like sort of diversity literally in the sample populations that people are pulling from, and then saying, oh, well, this is what's happening in larger society because these like 20 participants did it. And that's one of the things that I kind of want to try to break out of, not only in this particular research project, but just like in my research practice in general, where if I'm asking these questions about like these films and all these different types of media, that I'm not only engaging with art appreciators, but then also art makers. And so one of the future phases of the project that I've been imagining is to bring in the filmmakers. Like, because again, a lot of the work that, or the different films that I've included in my study are by filmmakers that I either like know through the festivals. Yeah, I love this. They're filmmakers that I've been in different festivals with. They're good friends of mine. Just like brilliant artists that I know that they have very sort of specific practice in terms of building these landscapes and these worlds. Or I want to ask sort of individuals who are artists or are in interdisciplinary spaces as well to do it and sort of get and see and understand the different levels and dynamics in like how descriptive people get. So that's one of the, like, it is like, as the study's been forming, one of the things that I really want to do. And I'm actually like, I haven't started recruiting for the study all that much yet, but it is going to be starting to happen soon. And if anyone's interested either in participating or in just learning more, definitely reach out to me, and we can talk about it, because it's something that like communal practice also in that form is really important to me.
I definitely be down to participate. Yeah, it sounds really fun.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, yeah. Hit me up. There are pictures. That's fantastic. It is. All right, so now we're gonna kick off the sonic meditation. And it won't be Tambourine by Eve. I'm so sorry, but not sorry at all. Right.
That would be a perfect song either way.
But just to give everyone like the frame again, that will be, or sort of like the instructive frame. So with each sonic landscape, sort of the suggestion is to latch on to some element that resonates with you. This could be the rhythm of the song. This could be a specific melody or harmony that you hear. It could be a repeated phrase in the song. And essentially what you should try to do, or if you want to try to do this, is tune into that element with your body's rhythm. And so that could be the rhythm of your breathing. It could be the rhythm of your blinking, or the flexing and squeezing of muscles. And whatever form or kind of like you want to be comfortable, exactly. If you want to lay down, do that. If you'd like to sit up and close your eyes, do that. And 2 prompts to potentially think about and meditate on, which we'll be focusing on when we like finish each track and then kind of do our free writing will be describe how you felt about the events of that song as if you were talking to a friend, and describe to the best of your ability any significant events or moments of emotion that you experienced, and provide as much context as you can as to why you felt that way. Or with each of these landscapes, what sounds and imagery came to mind as you were listening, and what rhythms and sounds did you latch to? So think about those things for when we're writing about it after the fact. All right, so I'm going to play the first track. Okay, so that was our first track. And I guess we'll give people what, 3-ish, 5-ish minutes. That was. It's a beautiful album. Yeah. But yeah, take 3 to 5 minutes right now. Write down any thoughts, and again, just write whatever comes to mind. Play it while, yeah, I'll play it while we're writing too, and then we'll check in. Right? Isn't it beautiful?
And if you want like a reference or something to jump off from writing, feel free to use the questions that we posed earlier as a base.
All right, and then we'll do that. And I'll run it one more time through actually, and then when it's done running through again, we can talk. So that works perfectly. All right. All right. That was part number one. I'll bring it back into this particular atmosphere. And yeah, if anyone's willing to share what they wrote, what they reflected on, what it felt like, this is just the open floor for that. I guess for the sake of those on Zoom hearing better, just make sure you project, but the floor is ours.
I felt like something that really stuck out to me was I just felt this strong sense of like dissonance, this like balance, dissonance, this like juxtaposition. I felt like, especially in the very beginning, I felt such a sense of like whimsical curiosity, and I really felt like, oh, we're like going somewhere. There's something about like the vocalizations that really felt like, I don't know, we're going somewhere a little bit like wild, and a little bit free. And then that like sax comes in, and I almost feel the toil of having traveled this road already, even as it continues to be new. And like, I felt that a lot. I felt that like juxtaposition of like going down this path and also having been on path.
On a sense of like a path too, I felt like the beginning, especially with the giggles, reminded me. It was sounded like an older person, but it felt like a baby. And so I was thinking, like visually, I saw these like little bursting orange bubbles, which to me like felt like babies or something. And then when it came kind of more, I guess you could say somber or like kind of basically thicker, I would say, like and less bubbly and light. I was thinking of how, like for me, it kind of I was visualizing, especially also because we were earlier seeing the sun setting, like this night scene and galaxies and stars in general, which was also like I was kind of writing that those like orange grape little bubbles were like stars and like kind of this like movement, road, transient type of.
I get this I got this very cyclical energy type vibe with the music in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then you start to see, oh, like this isn't part of the cycle is that like we're not in the beginning of anything. Like actually this person has been in this circle for a long time. This like other jazzy influence sax. I just like, this is also something I want to add to this. Like, if someone's description resonates with you, if you want to like, or like snap or something, because you said literally what I wrote down, and that's crazy. And I was like, because I literally wrote tickling, or like you said giggling. I was like, yeah, tickling. Like that's what the voice at the beginning sounded like, and then bubbles. I was like, there's tickling and giggling, and then bubbles. And then when I wrote down when the saxophone came in, I felt like spinning. Like I was spinning, and it felt smooth and very soft and warm. And then I felt myself floating. And I said the voice was playful and velvet. I definitely felt it giggly. I think I actually did giggle out loud for the first time.
Y'all are saying this in such grown-up ways, because you said like
It's very childish.
because I heard like giggling and like the blowing bubbles at the beginning. My first thought was like, I was like, it's the Teletubbies. Like I was like, it's the Teletubbies all grown up and they're having like, like in Sesame Street when they have like a mock jazz scene where they're like, now an evening with the count, and it goes, and I was like, this is exactly what I was feeling. I think as I got deeper into it, I was like, this is Kyle Barker scatting on Living Single. And then my thoughts got more into like memory later on, like the memories that were brought up for me. But for the very beginning, I was like, it's the Teletubbies.
Wow. I feel like Teletubbies all grown up. That makes too much sense to me, actually. Anyone else want to share?
I have something. When we first played it, weirdly enough, the first thing I kind of thought it was like a pond, and like I kind of imagined it like in a Studio Ghibli sort of style, like a style pond. I don't know why I went there, but that's kind of where I went. And then when you played it a second time, I got a completely different vibe. Like the first vibe was more serene, I guess, but the second one became completely eerie as it went on. Like when it was playing, I was reminded of Jack the Ripper. Like I just imagined like a like a 1800s like London. I imagined like imagine like a candlelit street. Imagine like fog, like low fog.
Okay, Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was this like really kind of dreary element.
Yeah.
Like balancing on this other side of this like whimsy. Wow.
Yeah, and like the way I kind of sometimes how when I listen to music and I visualize it, is sometimes either very sporadic images or it's kind of like a director, whereas like as the song elevates or de-escalates, my vision kind of changes. But for here, it was just kind of just random shots. And as the jazz started to kind of pick up a bit, I imagine a jazz band, like kind of like a jazz band is like a like I imagine police officers. this is very dark, but like I just imagine police officers investigating something and jazz players kind of being in the background. I guess.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that like film noir style.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was kind of going to, and then and then I imagine like Jack the Ripper as like not someone you can see, but his face was obscured by like just black, So that's where the eerie vibe started to come in. And then it started to shift completely to Salvador Dali, like that painting of the clocks drooping.
Wow.
Immediately went to that, and I don't know. I guess like the little like Teletubby voices, I guess, kind of like with matched up with a Salvador Dali in that specific painting. It kind of, I don't know. I guess that bubbling or Teletubby voice kind of sounds like sounds a bit out of place. I think that's what that Salvador Dali painting kind of represents in my head. It's kind of out of place, kind of weird, kind of like, I don't know, like you have a serene kind of jazzy sort of thing going in the background. The SM dude just like, I don't know, popping gum. it's just kind of goofy to me.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of like the contrast, I imagine.
That's really cool.
It's just legitimately a question. I'm curious if that bubbly voice is left over from the track before because of the way that the tracking is cut up. I'm wondering if this is part of that like transition from one space into another, that mobilization as like a remnant.
It's a good question, and it's not. It's not. It's all so. This is what I want to leave space. Does anyone else want to share or or give their experience of it? Because what's yes, there's someone else on Zoom. I want to answer that in a second, or like speak to that in a second. But go ahead.
My name is Marcus, and I imagined like it gave me a lot of blue vibes, especially the jazz instruments and the piano and the string instrument in the background. So I imagined that it was raining. And the voice made me think of like an older man. And I just imagined that he was kind of like sitting in like a dark diner in a city next to a window with like a bunch of rain droplets on it. So I just got like a really blues vibe from it.
Wow. Wow. Bubble bath?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if
Oh, wow.
I don't know, it brought me back to like a memory of like after a bath in my mom, she would like tickle me. So I was just like writing out like the question, are you ticklish? And then the song made me feel like a fuzzy feeling. And it felt like that sad when you fall asleep or something. And then when the sax came in, I felt like my ears getting hot.
Did y'all hear that on the Zoom, by the way? No? Oh, could you
Oh, yeah. So first going into the song, it made me imagine like being in a bubble bath, and then brought back a memory of after a bath, my mom would like tickle me and like ask me if I'm ticklish. So like I started off like the question, like, are you ticklish? And then I would say, I feel the tingles already, and now it's fuzzy. And then when the sax came in, my ears are heating up. And then the last thing I wrote was, are you still ticklish? So,
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. This is
it's cool to see how much bubbles came up.
Bubbles came up a lot. Bubbles came up a lot. What's so interesting, and I actually do love that we did it this way, because I was like, I wonder if I should tell you about the track or tell you anything about it beforehand. So what's interesting is the voice that y'all heard, one, was Pharoah Sanders, which is just like so interesting to me. Like he's like a really phenomenal jazz musician. And the album that this is from, it's this live recording of Pharoah Sanders being accompanied by Floating Points, which they are featured on this playlist that I have a lot, and they're accompanied by the London Symphony Orchestra. So even when you were saying like, oh, like the London foggy, dreary vibes, like that's there. And like this is one of the shortest tracks from this entire album that I play. Like the other ones, like you see and hear these transitions through it. And as we go on in the sort of exercise, and then we have the point where it's just all put in, you'll hear some more from the album. But it's so interesting to me, like this contrast of this like very playful sort of like the giggle bubbliness on top then of like the the orchestra and then the saxophone. Because I think it was Pharaoh Sanders that was both doing like the da, 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 and then also playing the sax. So it's just like really interesting that those vocalizations were coming from the same source.
I also kind of wanted to point out too, like from based off what we're building on, like I think I also really appreciate like when we're called to like imagine too, and we're having these visual references. Because I feel like when we're thinking about the sessions that are to come for this like workshop series, collaging is really like taking these visual references to create new meaning or new like visuals for yourself to like create understanding and meaning. So like, I think it would even be cool to like consider these like as like a framework for like the collages we might do, like if you plan to attend like the next session for, I think that's the 18th, but in general, it's like those visual references too, like when brought together, create this like new meaning and understanding too.
But yeah, so now I guess I'll play the next track, and then we'll do sort of this next track, we'll talk about this one again, and this one's like 3 minutes long, so what I'll do is I'll play it once through and then just experience it, and then the second playthrough, that's when you can start writing down and journaling, and then after that second play, we'll kind of convene and share our thoughts, and then from there I'll just keep playing it. The one after this next one, I'm actually really excited to hear and see how people feel about it, so we'll get to that one too, but it's a little bit longer. But yeah, and hopefully there was another one I was going to play as the next one that would move us into like a very sort of jarring landscape in a lot of ways, but this one's hopefully a little bit of a smoother transition. So all right, so I'll play once through, just listen, and then the second time through you can write or express or however you see fit to go about the order's operations, but then after the second play we'll talk about it.
These are words that go together well, my Michel. Michel, ma belle, sont les mots qui vont très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all I want to say. Until I find a way, I will say the only words I know that you'll understand. Do-do-do, sont les mots qui vont très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I need you, I need you, I need you. I need to make you see what you mean to me. Until I do, I'm hoping Michel. Michel, ma belle, sont les mots qui vont très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all I want to say. Until I find a way, I will say the only words I know that you